spent a lot of time thinking about something called intellectual virtues. I've been interested in them for many years, and they are part of what I did my dissertation on. And I really think that people in prison need to know what these are because they are something that it can be developed. You can grow in them, you can increase them. And when it comes to something called intellectual vice, you can reduce them. But it's not something new or innovative. It's not like you haven't heard of these things before. You just may not have heard them called intellectual virtues or vice. Ask yourself this question. When you think of somebody who is a good student, a good learner, or just an all-around good thinker, think of someone that you believe to be a good thinker, a good learner, or a good student. What is it about that person that makes them a good learner, a good thinker, or a good student? What kind of traits do they have? What kind of qualities do they have that lead you to think they're a good learner or a good thinker? A lot of times what we will say is that this person has a lot of knowledge. They've got book smarts, maybe. They know a lot of stuff. Right? A lot of times we associate people who are good students, good learners, good thinkers as having a lot of knowledge. So they know a lot of stuff. They're maybe you call them well-read, well-educated, or something like that. But another thing we might think about when we think of someone as a good thinker, learner, or student is that they have a high IQ. So if you know what an IQ is, it's the intelligence quotient. In Texas, everybody goes through an IQ test. Everybody has to take an IQ test when they go to prison. And then whatever their IQ is put on their travel card or in their profile. And the things that are associated with IQ are things like good memory, you can think fast, you can process information fast, you're a good problem solver, or you have the ability to notice different abstract patterns and changes in the environment. So general problem solving ability, somebody who's good at math, somebody who's good at learning new languages, these people have a high IQ. So when it comes to somebody who's a good learner, a good student, we might say, well, one thing a good student has is a lot of knowledge. They're book smart, they're well read. But another thing a good student might have is a high IQ. However, I want you to think about something else. Those are some common things that we associate people who are good students. They have a lot of knowledge, they have a high IQ, maybe they finish their test before everybody else, they always make good grades, maybe they're also very well educated. However, think about what other kind of demands come with being a good learner. First of all, you can have a lot of knowledge or have a high IQ, but you also need to care about learning, right? You have to be concerned. You have to believe that learning is worth doing. It's a good thing to do it. In other words, you have to be motivated to learn. You have to believe it's a good thing to learn and to be a good thinker. You have to care about it. And you have to know when you use your intellectual skills in order to become more educated or to become a better student. In other words, there's something other than just having a lot of knowledge, reading a lot of books, and there's something other than just having a high IQ that accounts for somebody who's a good student, a good thinker, a good learner. And what these other things are is your attitudes, your dispositions, your mindsets. It's the character traits you might have that lead you to act, think, and feel in certain ways. For example, let's talk about open-mindedness. I'm actually going to discuss open-mindedness at length in a separate lecture, but let's just think about open-mindedness. It doesn't really matter how you define open-mindedness. Think of two people who are very well educated. Let's say they both have PhDs. They're both Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so. These people are very well educated. They're very knowledgeable. They have the PhD in the same area. Let's say they're both biologists. And they also have very high IQs. So you have a high IQ, you have a higher than average IQ if your IQ is over 115. You're like genius level if you have an IQ of over like 130. So let's say these two people both have PhDs from really good schools and they both have IQs of 130. But one of them has an open mind, or they are open-minded, meaning that they like to learn, they like to understand opposing perspectives, they like to have discussions with people that disagree with them, they like to learn about new information and alternative perspectives. The other person is closed-minded. This person believes that the knowledge they have about biology is the truth. Their perspective on it is the only perspective. It's the most valid perspective. And they're not interested in listening to people who disagree with them. They're not interested in learning more from different perspectives. What they know is, in fact, the truth, period. So you have two people with a high IQ, two people that are very well educated, have PhDs. One of them is open-minded and one of them is closed-minded. Which one of these two people do you think will have a better understanding of the world, have a better understanding of truth, have a better understanding of biology than the other one? Is it going to be the person who is open-minded or closed-minded? I think it's pretty intuitive. I think pretty much everybody is going to say it's the person who is open-minded. But think about being open-minded is different from having a high IQ, and it's different from having a good education or being really smart and having read a lot of books. For example, you might think of your grandparents or people that you look up to as open-minded, and your grandparents may not have ever went to college, and who knows what their IQ is, but you still consider them to be open-minded and wise, and you value their insight and opinions on certain things. It's because they have certain character traits or certain dispositions and attitudes that lend them to be able to understand the world differently. And maybe you refer to that as open-mindedness when other people are closed-minded. This is pretty important, I think, for people in prison because number one, you may not have access to a good education. You may not have college opportunities on the prison or at the prison that you're at, or the college opportunities you do have just aren't that great. Or you might not have a very good library. Now, you all have the tablets, so you have a lot more exposure to information and education than people in times past. But you may not have opportunities to go to college. You may not have a great library at your prison. Or maybe right now, the things on the tablets are pretty limited. Also, you can't do anything about that. Also, when it comes to your IQ, you can't do a heck of a lot to change IQ. And I don't think IQ is really that important in the big picture. And that's why I'm talking about intellectual virtues, because these things you can change. You can develop intellectual virtues. Intellectual virtues you can think of as good character traits of a good thinker, good learner, or good student. Let's just say all those three things are basically the same: a good thinker, a good learner, and a good student. Intellectual virtues are just the character traits of a good thinker. Now, some of you may have heard the word virtue before. What is a virtue? For what I'm talking about right now, you can just think of a virtue as an excellent character trait. That's it. There's a lot of discussion about what a virtue is, but for now, just think of a virtue as an excellent character trait. A lot of times when we hear the word virtue, we might think about moral virtues. Moral virtues you can think of as character traits that enable you to be a good neighbor, or civic virtues are character traits that enable you to be a good citizen. So what kind of character traits would help you become a better neighbor to someone else? Well, being compassionate or patient or honest or courageous or fair. What kind of civic virtues would enable you to be a good citizen? Well, having respect for other people, being tolerant of other people, having community mindedness or civic mindedness where you're concerned for the common good. So those are character traits of people. Well, when it comes to character traits of a good thinker, we're talking about things like open-mindedness, curiosity, thinking for yourself, attentiveness, paying attention. We're talking about intellectual humility, being able to admit when you're wrong. Those are character traits of a good thinker. And that's what I want to break down for you. That's what I want to talk about. Now, the information I'm giving you comes from a philosopher named Jason Bear. Jason Bear. And there's a free book online called Cultivating Good Minds. It's free. It's a PDF online. I'll explain the information to you at the bottom of the screen so your people can get it. You can print it out. Now, it's like a 500-page book, so just know that in advance. If your people print it out for you and send it in, it's like 500 pages. But the section where he talks about intellectual virtues, and then he has a separate chapter where he breaks down all the intellectual virtues, that's what I'm going to be talking about. But first, we want to talk about the different dimensions of an intellectual virtue. And again, a lot of this stuff is just intuitive, right? I'm just putting a name to some things that you kind of already knew. So first is the ability or skill dimension. There are at least 4 dimensions to an intellectual virtue. What that means is if you possess the intellectual virtue of open-mindedness or curiosity, what that means is there are 4 different aspects to your character that we can see. One of them is your skill dimension. I'm going to use open-mindedness as an example, but I'm going to explain open-mindedness separately as well. So let's say open-mindedness is just your ability to switch perspectives. So let's say you're a Christian and you want to understand things from an Islamic perspective. So you have the ability or you have the skill to switch perspectives, or to think from the perspective of an atheist, or think from the perspective of an agnostic. If you have the ability to do that, then you have one important dimension of the intellectual virtue of open-mindedness. You have the skill or ability to switch perspectives when it's necessary, right? So when it comes to intellectual virtues, one of those intellectual virtues is called open-mindedness, and all intellectual virtues are broken down into 4 dimensions. The skill dimension of open-mindedness is when you are able to switch perspectives back and forth in order to understand things better. However, it's not just your ability to switch perspectives which makes it a virtue or which makes you an open-minded person. For example, you might know that in order to better understand someone with a different perspective, you need to put yourself in their shoes, switch perspectives, try to see things from their perspective, but you don't care, right? To put yourself in someone else's shoes, to switch perspectives, it takes effort. You have to be patient and really work through things from a different perspective. That takes effort, but some people just don't care about it. So for example, if I were to give people a test on what is open-mindedness, and you took an exam or a quiz next week, you could write out the definition and you could tell me that open-mindedness is the ability to switch perspectives. And then I ask you to show me what it's like to switch perspectives, right? And you do a presentation or you do a role-playing event and you show me how to switch perspectives between maybe agnostics and Christians or Jews and Buddhists or whatever. But you personally could care less about being open-minded. That's because if you are intellectually virtuous in that area, you're also motivated to do so. This is the motivational dimension to an intellectual virtue. You have to care about being open-minded or virtuous. You have to be ready and willing to switch perspectives when necessary. In an ideal world, you have a passion for the truth, which motivates your other virtues. You know, if you don't care about learning the truth with a capital T, if you have no desire to do so, if you are not normally a curious kind of person, then it's going to be difficult for you to understand why it's important to be open-minded. But the motivational dimension of open-mindedness includes a passion for the truth. You want to understand the truth. And because maybe you know you don't have all the answers, you realize it's important to maybe have conversations with others so that you can understand the truth. But if you don't have that desire, then it's going to be very difficult for you to understand the value of being intellectually virtuous. So an intellectually virtuous person is going to ask the right kind of questions. They're going to be able to switch perspectives. They're going to be able to think for themselves. And they want to do this so that they can reach the truth, acquire knowledge, and get a deeper understanding of things. Now, in all of this, there's something else to learn, is that we possess virtues in degrees. All right. So this is not the third dimension of the intellectual virtues. I'm just pointing this out. We possess virtues in degrees. So you might be more open-minded than I am. And you might be more open-minded in politics than I am. But let's say I'm more open-minded about religious questions than you are. So we can be intellectually virtuous in degrees. Some people are more intellectually virtuous than others, and that's what I meant by you can grow and develop intellectual virtues. So we do these things by degrees. But there's a third dimension to virtue, and this Dr. Baer refers to as the judgment dimension. So he refers to some studies at Harvard University with Project Zero, where they found that students had the skills and abilities to be open-minded, for example, and they also really wanted to be open-minded. They believed being open-minded was important, right? So they had the motivational dimension. So they had the skill or ability dimension, check, and they had the motivational dimension, check, but they still failed to be open-minded in many circumstances. Why? Because they didn't know when they should be open-minded and maybe when they shouldn't be open-minded. In other words, there are certain contexts, there are certain times in life when you ought to be open-minded, and there are other times when you shouldn't. And these students couldn't tell the difference. They didn't know when to engage or switch perspectives and when not to. And he calls that the judgment dimension. In my opinion, the judgment dimension is one of the most difficult to explain. And that's just because historically, when we try to explain judgment, we often come up with lists of rules and bullet points. You know, if you encounter this, then do this. If you encounter this, then do this. But really, judgment is being able to go beyond any rules or lists and just know and understand how to respond to situations in the world. And that really just comes from a lot of experience. One thing Dr. Baer does not discuss in this book that I referred you all to is a fourth dimension. He actually believes that there are 4 dimensions, but in this book, he only discusses 3. And that is what he calls the affective dimension, or you might call it the emotional or feeling-oriented dimension. So if you are intellectually virtuous, you have certain skills, like being able to switch perspectives. You have a certain motivation, because you think it's important to do that. And you know when you ought to be open-minded and when you shouldn't be open-minded. But the other thing is emotions or feelings. If you are genuinely an open-minded person, then when you realize it's time to be open-minded in this situation, you want to do that, so you're motivated, but you also get a sense of pleasure in doing so. In other words, genuinely open-minded people are not reluctantly open-minded. It's not like they encounter a situation and they're like, man, I gotta be open-minded right now. This sucks. When they engage a situation where they need to be open-minded, they derive a sort of pleasure with it. They enjoy it. It's not something they have to do begrudgingly or with a sense of, they're just pissed off about it. So intellectual virtues have at least 4 dimensions. If you're missing any one of them, then you're not fully virtuous in that area. So they have an ability or skill dimension, a motivational dimension, a judgment dimension, and they have a feeling or affect dimension. You have a skill, you're motivated to employ that skill, you know when to employ that skill, and you get a sense of pleasure from employing that skill in the right situation. Now, maybe that might all be kind of abstract, but now I'm going to start talking about individual virtues, and I'll apply those 4 dimensions, and you'll see what I mean.